Hello and welcome to Big Picture Monday. My name is Cali Black, here with all the context you need to totally rock this week's Come Follow Me readings. This week we are diving into First Nephi chapters 1 through 5. And thank you so much for being here and watching Big Picture Monday. Remember that spreading the word about Big Picture Monday is such a big help, sharing it with a friend. If you're on Instagram and watching this, or on YouTube as well, liking it tells the algorithm that more people want to see it. Commenting on it tells it that it's even more popular. Sharing the link actually makes a huge difference. Like just pressing the share button tells the algorithm that more people want to see it too. So thank you for any way that you're able to support. If you find these videos useful, let's help as many people as possible. I know there's a lot of teens and youth who watch these videos too, I think about the resources that I had available when I was a teenager, and I'm not even that old. And yet there's so many cool resources that are around us that the youth get to use nowadays. So welcome, especially if you are a youth that's here. I'm glad that you're here and making some sort of effort to understand the scriptures better. Okay, let's dive into the real first part of the scriptures now, after our beautiful week last week with introductory pages. This is a book, First Nephi in particular, that we've all read many times. It's cliche, but it's cliche because it's true. We've all read First Nephi many times in our life. And I think there's a huge benefit to reading a book of scripture that we're very, very familiar with, because for the past couple years, like think of Old Testament, a lot of those books, even the epistles last year at the end of New Testament, you're just trying to survive. You're like, I'm trying to understand what's going on and get some sort of spiritual lesson out of it. And here we are now with like a totally different mindset of, most of you could probably tell the first 5 chapters of First Nephi pretty nicely on your own, right? Like we're familiar with a lot of these stories. So let's look at the benefits of that. The benefit is we leave so much space for the Spirit to teach us what we need to know. Hopefully we're doing that all the time, but we're not getting bogged down in like, what's happening? What are they talking about? What kind of language are they using? Book of Mormon language is actually pretty easy to understand. It's pretty intuitive, especially if you've heard it for most of your life. And so just thinking all of these very familiar scriptures where you're like, I know exactly what the teacher is going to say about go and do, and I know exactly what we're going to talk about for born of goodly parents, right? Like you already know the lessons. So then pausing and being humble enough to think there's got to be something I can still learn. Doesn't matter how many times you read First Nephi 3:7. There's something new you can learn. And our life circumstances are always changing, right? So what can you, in your life circumstance this very week, learn from First Nephi 3:7? Or any of the other stories that we're going to address? We're always changing, and that means the lessons that we can learn are always changing as well. So I'm excited to dive into these more familiar stories and really just kind of focus on what we can learn at this point in time. Now, especially in the Book of Mormon, I want to make sure you know who is writing each book of scripture, because it's not quite as intuitive as some of other books of scripture. Book of Mormon has a lot of different things going on. But to be clear, First Nephi was written by Nephi. It's not a trick question. It really is Nephi who wrote it. So you're going to see he wrote it in first person, which if you forget your English days, that means you're going to see pronouns like I, me, my, like it's Nephi himself writing about his own experiences. But one thing that I want to point out is that Nephi is writing this account as a much older prophet leader living in the promised land. This is not like a journal that Nephi is keeping. And he's like, guess what Laman and Lemuel did to me today? You'll never guess. Or, oh, I got this revelation today. He's not writing it in the moment. He's writing it, timelines are really hard to tell at the beginning of the Book of Mormon here, but probably at least a couple decades later. He's already made it to the promised land. He's already established the land of Nephi, and he's got all these people who are righteous with him, and he's like their prophet leader. And now he's writing the record. And so when you see what Nephi's writing in First Nephi, he has perspective on his side, right? Like he's been able to reflect on all of these major events that have happened in his life, and he's writing the parts of the story that we need to hear in order to bring us closer to God. In fact, next week in chapter 6, we'll read a scripture that talks about how he's only going to write things that persuade men to come unto God. And so I just think it's interesting. You're going to see Nephi writing what happened, but you're going to see his editorial commentary as well. He's going to be talking about the lessons we can learn from those experiences. So just kind of notice when it's like, okay, he's telling a story here and oh, he's adding some of that commentary, some of his own thoughts about what's actually going on. It's kind of cool to just see that. So look out for that as you're going through it. Okay, where are we? We're in Jerusalem in the year 600 BC. Now, I do not even have close to enough time to give you a brief history of Jerusalem because it's all over the place. And if you were here with me 2 years ago in the Old Testament, we talked a lot about it. But give me just like 2 sentences, maybe 3 sentences, and let me remind you. Israel had been split themselves into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. Is this sounding vaguely familiar? Northern kingdom of Israel and southern kingdom of Judah, and this is where Jerusalem was in the southern kingdom of Judah. Now, in the northern kingdom of Israel, there were most of the tribes were up there, including Manasseh. Keep that in mind, okay? And then we learn in 2 Kings, I even wrote down the reference, 2 Kings, not that, chapter 17, if you want to go back and reread it, we learn that the northern kingdom of Israel is conquered by the Assyrians. And many of them are taken away by the Assyrians, others escape to different places, and some people were able to escape down to the southern kingdom, and this would have been a few of Lehi's ancestors. And by ancestors, I mean just like a couple generations before Lehi, roughly. Because Lehi was from the tribe of Manasseh. So his ancestors had settled in Judah. They're in Jerusalem. Lehi was likely born and raised in Jerusalem. Nephi, now born and raised in Jerusalem. That is their home. From the Old Testament, in 2 Kings, again, we know that Judah is about to fall to Babylon. The Babylonians are about to come and conquer them and take them away into Babylon. But Jerusalem doesn't quite believe that yet. In the Old Testament, we learn that there was a king Zedekiah. And King Zedekiah was that like last king before Jerusalem was conquered by the Babylonians. So this is the setting where we're at, where we've got Lehi, this prophet, there in Jerusalem, and the story begins. And that's where the stories intersect there. It's in 2 Kings, if you want to review any of that. So let's dive into it. Chapter 1, Nephi's going to introduce himself. Remember, this is older Nephi, a couple decades later. He's going to say that I'm going to tell you the story of everything that happened. He's going to make the record. He talks about how his father Lehi was a prophet and that he received a vision where the Lord told Lehi that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. So Lehi started spreading the message and letting everyone know. And the people in Jerusalem did not like this. In fact, they were extremely angry. They wanted to kill Lehi. And Nephi kind of adds his own commentary again, saying, I'm going to make an abridgment. I'm going to like shorten and rewrite what my dad has written, which we'll find out later. We're very grateful that Nephi did that abridgment because we no longer have Lehi's record, but we'll talk about that more later. But we have Nephi saying, I'm going to give you just like a little bit of information about my dad. Chapter 2, Lehi now gets another vision. And in this dream, God tells Lehi, it's time to leave Jerusalem. You've done what you can. It's time to go. And so Lehi gathers his family, which includes his wife, Sariah. And then we've got his children. Laman is the oldest, and then Lemuel, and then Sam, and then Nephi. So the 4 brothers in that age order. He gathers them all together. They get some provisions, they get some tents, and they escape into the wilderness. And they go to a place, they kind of settle down in a place. So it's not like they're wandering constantly. They leave and they wander for a bit, and then they settle down at a place in the wilderness. And Lehi calls the valley Valley Lemuel, and the river Laman. And Laman and Lemuel just start complaining. Why are we out here? This doesn't make sense. And Nephi actually doesn't, he admits, he doesn't really know what's going on. Like, sure, their father said some stuff, but he still hasn't really understood. And so Nephi goes and he asks the Lord. He prays. He prays to know that like this is all right and that they've been following their father correctly. And the Lord just blesses Nephi and answers his prayers and tells him, yes, this is right. And the Lord, this is very important, the Lord tells Nephi, you are going to be blessed. You are so righteous. You are going to be a ruler over your brothers because you are righteous and humble and faithful. And that promise right there pretty much sets the scene for all the rest of the Book of Mormon and the issues that Laman and Lemuel and their descendants had with that promise, because they perceived that promise very differently as their brother wanting to just take power over them, their older brothers, for no reason at all. So keep that promise in mind. It causes a lot of issues down the road for generations to come. Okay, chapter 3. They've now settled themselves outside in the wilderness, right? Like, they're just chilling there. Lehi gets another dream. You gotta go back to Jerusalem because the brass plates are there. Now, what are these brass plates? The brass plates had the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Probably some other books of scripture as well. We know the words of Isaiah were definitely included in there too, as well as some genealogy. And they were with a man named Laban. To be clear, Laban was not a king. He was not like a ruler. He was just wealthy. He may have had like a religious ruling role, but he was just wealthy. He wasn't like the king. I feel like growing up, I thought he was like the king. Not a king. And so Lehi sends all 4 of his sons back to Jerusalem to get the brass plates. First thing, Laman tries. He's the oldest brother, right? He's going to give it a try. He goes in and asks. He's told no. Next thing, they go and get all their riches that they had left behind, and they basically go and try and buy the brass plates or bribe them away. And they're told no. In fact, that time they're almost killed and they're chased out of the city. And Laman and Lemuel get so angry with Nephi and Sam that they start to beat their brothers. And this is when an angel steps in and commands them to stop and tells them, go back and try one more time. The Lord will make this happen for you. And that sets the scene for chapter 4. Nephi is filled with faith. He goes into the city and he finds Laban passed out on the ground. And the spirit constrains him to kill Laban. Nephi does not want to do this. And he protests for quite a while until the spirit confirms to him this is what needs to happen in order for all of the other good events to happen after this. And so Nephi follows the spirit. He slays Laban. He puts on his clothes as a disguise. He goes into where Laban keeps the records. Laban's very helpful servant named Zoram is there, and Zoram helps get the brass plates, and they start leaving out of the city, and Zoram's like, hey, where are we going? And eventually Nephi has to reveal to his brothers that this is Nephi, and Zoram agrees to go with Nephi and his brothers into the wilderness. He agrees to go with them. And they travel back to their parents. Chapter 5, our last chapter this week, we learned that back home, back at the tents in the wilderness, Sariah has been complaining a lot against her husband. Where are her children? Like, are they gone now? What is going on? And Lehi comforts his wife in this really sweet little glimpse we get into their marriage. And then the brothers return. It's so exciting. And Zoram is with them, which means that no one knows that they've left or where they've gone. No one's going to be able to track them down and come after them. Sariah is so happy and praises the Lord. Lehi praises the Lord and opens up the records and searches the scriptures, and he starts to prophesy and teach his family. Beautiful chapters. I love them. That's about it. Now it's your turn. Your turn to get in the scriptures. Read these verses. Even if you know the story like the back of your hand, read them and ask the Spirit to show you where you can find yourself in the story. My personal focus question for this week is one that will carry on for the next few weeks, but I want to tackle it right now. What's the difference between how Laman and Lemuel react to situations and how Nephi and Sam react to situations? Not just their reactions, but their actions as well. What do they do as a result of their confusions? I want to study that. All right, have a great week this week and happy studying.